The government's new plan for immigration, which will be put into law through the Nationality and Borders Bill, is a longer-term solution that will address many of these underlying factors to deterring illegal migration and addressing underlying pull factors into the UK's asylum system. It will bring in a range of measures, including the one-stop appeals process, the ability to process claims outside the country, the ability to declare inadmissibility to our asylum system and have differentiation. Those who arrive in the UK having passed through safe countries and life sentences for people smugglers. People should, Madam Deputy Speaker, claim asylum in the first safe country they reach, and nobody needs to flee France in order to be safe. However, Madam Deputy Speaker, we are not waiting until the Nationality and Borders Bill passes. We are undertaking a wide range of operational and diplomatic work. I have already approved maritime tactics, including boat turnarounds for Border Force to deploy. The government, the police, the National Crime Agency are taking action at every level to take down the people smuggling gangs. And once again, however, we cannot do it alone. We continue to work closely with the French to prevent crossings. More than 20,000 have been stopped this year, which I think all members of this House should recognise the magnitude and the scale of the illegal migration crisis that we are seeing. We have dismantled 17 organised criminal groups and secured over 400 arrests and 65 convictions. But this crisis continues, clearly demonstrating we need to do more together. This is a complicated issue and there is no simple fix. It does mean a Herculean effort, and it will be impossible without close cooperation between all international partners and agencies. I also urge colleagues to reconsider their opposition to the Nationality and Borders Bill, because it is an essential element in finding a long-term solution to what is, Madam Deputy Speaker, a long-term problem that successive governments have faced over decades. As we mourn those who have died in the most horrendous of circumstances, I hope that the whole House can come together to send a clear message that crossing the Channel in this lethal way, in a small boat, is not the way to come to our country. It is, of course, unnecessary, illegal, and desperately unsafe. I commend this statement to the House.
Nick Thomas-Symonds.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Home Secretary for her statement and for advance sight of it. Yesterday's human tragedy in the Channel was the most awful of reminders of the dangers of crossing the Channel, and that people's lives are at risk every day in these makeshift, flimsy, small boats. And it's a sobering moment for our country, for France, and for the international community. We understand that at least 27 people have died. Some reports that include 7 women and 3 children. And we do think across the House of those lost and their loved ones left behind. We think too of those who've been rescued and are receiving medical treatment, fighting for their lives. I'd also like to pay tribute to all those involved in the joint French-British search and rescue operation in the air and on the sea, people putting themselves in danger to help others. I also understand that there have been arrests in France of those suspected of this vile crime of people smuggling. I appreciate very much the difficulties and sensitivities when there's an ongoing legal case, particularly in another jurisdiction. I further appreciate it's at a very early stage, but I would be grateful if the Home Secretary could give the House an update on possible timings for the legal case and reassure the House that Britain will give all cooperation that is required by the prosecuting authorities in France. And will that full cooperation extend not only to this tragic case, but all ongoing prosecutions where we can make an intelligence contribution? Madam Deputy Speaker, I've raised on a number of occasions before the arrangements we have in place with the French authorities. And I would ask if, firstly, the Home Secretary could set out how many days a week the full existing surveillance capacity is currently operating, and what will the Home Secretary be doing urgently to increase that surveillance? Now, I pay tribute to the National Crime Agency and our frontline law enforcement officers for the work that they do, and I heard what the Home Secretary said in her statement about law enforcement cooperation. But can she also tell the House what she will do to deepen that intelligence and law enforcement cooperation with the French authorities and indeed other countries, So the focus isn't only on coastal patrols, important though they are, but is also about disrupting the routes facilitated, often across hundreds and thousands of miles, by vile people smuggling gangs who have reckless disregard for human life. Can I also press the Home Secretary on properly managed, safe and legal routes? Can I ask specifically about the DUB scheme? The DUB scheme was closed down, having helped only 480 unaccompanied children, rather than the 3,000 it was expected to help. Will that scheme be urgently reinstated? The government has also announced the Afghanistan resettlement scheme, and we took the salute yesterday from our magnificent armed forces in New Palace Yard, who together with Border Force and our diplomats showed the very best of us as a country in their actions during Operation Pitting. But the government now needs to send out how practically it will make good on its promise to help a total of 20,000 people. We are some months on, we need an urgent update on that. Then there's the UK resettlement scheme that was announced in February of this year. And today the government has released the statistics on this. It shows that in its first year, only 770 people have been helped by that scheme. And taken with the other schemes, it's only 1,171 people who've been helped to the end of September, when the promise from the Home Office was to help 5,000 people in its first year. What will be done to make good on that promise? What urgent action will be taken to help those most in need? The Home Secretary mentioned the Nationality and Borders Bill, but she knows the opposition will not support a bill that breaches the Refugee Convention and damages our standing around the world. And indeed, the Home Secretary has spoken today of a worldwide migration crisis. Can ministers revisit their decision to cut the international aid budget and lead on the international stage to help those fleeing from persecution around the world? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, can I say that yesterday's terrible tragedy must be a moment for change. The time for urgent action to save lives is now.
Madam Secretary.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to begin my remarks, Madam Deputy Speaker, by actually echoing some of the comments that the Honourable Gentleman made. And in particular, that is a direct reference to actually our partners, our operational partners who day in, day out do incredible work that sometimes in this House gets overlooked too often. So on joint patrols, for example, and I know the Right Honourable Gentleman has asked about surveillance capability, we have officers from Border Force and UK law enforcement working in conjunction with the National Crime Agency and their French counterparts every day, Madam Deputy Speaker, in actually some of the most appalling conditions. And I would also like to refer all members, Honourable and Right Honourable members, to previous statements I've made in this House around loss of life, people smuggling, but actually some of the wider reforms that this government is bringing in. Because I have specifically mentioned just the weaponising of illegal migration, the fact that women and children, even babies, are being threatened and weaponised and being forced into some of these most appalling, unseaworthy vessels. Officers in France have also been attacked, physically attacked and injured in many quarters, and our Border Force patrols and officers themselves deal with many harrowing scenes every single day. So on that point, I would very much like to just very much support and commend the work that our people do. This is difficult work. And actually, if I may just come on to the Right Honourable Gentleman's other points as well, including the fact there is a global migration crisis. And this is not new. This is absolutely not new, Madam Deputy Speaker. And even in my days in my previous department in development, humanitarian crises, climate crises, they all force displacement. And we have seen many, many movements of people through the Sahel, through Libya, through the Eastern Mediterranean since 2013, 14 and 15. And this has all culminated now in much vast people movements, obviously with the Afghanistan crisis and other points as well. But specifically, on surveillance capability, and I will go through many of the points that the Right Honourable Gentleman has made, surveillance capability is stood up every day, dependent fundamentally on, for example, weather, whether or not planes can fly, drones can fly. And in fact, Madam Deputy Speaker, on Monday when I came to the House for questions and the urgent questions, I spoke about how drones are now being used in France, whereas previously they were not being used in France because their laws did not allow it. And we also have to recognise, Madam Deputy Speaker, our laws differ to my counterparts and our French counterparts, and therefore on intelligence cooperation, their laws are different to our own laws, and also their prosecution powers differ to our own prosecution powers as well. So it is absolutely right that we continue to not just cooperate. Cooperation is what we do day in, day out, but actually how we intensify our work, how we share data, how we share intelligence, and in fact our own laws prevent some of that from happening, and we are looking at ways in which we can bolster that and strengthen that. And we have to think about what that means in terms of data sharing. But also on prosecutions. The prosecutions that have taken place are very significant, they really are. Prosecution pathways in France differ to prosecution pathways in the United Kingdom, but also how we share across different jurisdictions information about individuals that have been arrested, because of course laws are different and differ. But also, I should just add, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are gangs that aren't just operating on the continent, in northern France or in Belgium or in Netherlands or Germany. There are gangs that operate in the United Kingdom, and that is where our resources are absolutely focused and targeted. And this isn't just about UK-France cooperation, and I've never ever said, actually, and I do want to put this on the record once again, this is not just a problem for the United Kingdom and France. When you look at Europe, from the gateway into Italy, Greece, now Poland, I spoke to my counterpart in Poland earlier on this week, my counterparts in Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, you name it, we see this as a wide-scale problem. Madam Deputy Speaker, just 2 other points, if I may, or 3 other points. On resettlement. Resettlement is a fundamental pillar of the work of this government, and the right honourable gentleman has mentioned resettlement figures. I would just like to caveat much of this, though, through the pandemic. He will respect and understand that travel movements have been restricted, resettlement rights have been limited because of the pandemic, but we are committed and we are working to absolutely resettle people in the way in which we have committed to do so. And of course that links to the Afghanistan resettlement scheme. In addition to the 15,000 people, Madam Deputy Speaker, that were evacuated under Operation Pitin. And I have also publicly said that we can only resettle once we have the ability and the infrastructure to create resettlement pathways so that we don't just bring people here and let them lead an inadequate life. They need to rebuild their lives. He also mentions, the right honourable gentleman also mentions the Dove scheme. I've actually put an offer on the table, not for the first time, to the French government today on a returns agreement, but in particular looking at family reunion and children. So this is again an offer that I have made repeatedly to my counterpart in France. We are determined, over the weekend we're going to be pursuing further discussions. We have to have viable agreements, and viable agreements have to reflect the type of crisis that we face on migration and the type of circumstances that we are now confronted with.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Deputy Speaker, can I just say to my honourable friend, it's quite clear, obviously, that this is not going to be ended at a stroke. But the reality is that even though we are not any longer part of the Dublin Convention is completely broken. And that across Europe at the moment, lots of countries are happy, as long as someone isn't staying, to see those migrants travel across their country into somebody else's jurisdiction. And that has led to the problem that we face now with those selecting to come to the UK ending up in France. Can she assure us in this House today that she is putting the greatest pressure on the French government to allow us to work with them in their territorial area, either by using patrol systems or ships, and/or members of the police or armed forces, to help them and support them? And they should do that because it would help them as much as it would help us.
My friend, as ever, hits the nail on the head and is absolutely right about the wider issues across EU member states. And we recognise this as well. I'll be speaking to Commissioner Johansson later on today as well. Not for the first time. I've had previous discussions with her about this. I think, number one, there is a recognition now. And it's absolutely tragic and appalling, Madam Deputy Speaker, that it takes a tragedy of this nature for momentum to be galvanised across other countries as well on this issue. And it should never take a crisis of this nature for action to come together. But my right honourable friend has specifically asked me about putting pressure, as far as I see it, not just pressure, but direct offers on the table to France about joint patrols whether it's territorial seas or on territory itself. This has been a constant offer, it really has. I have made that offer yet again to my counterpart in the last hour.
Martin Day.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a devastating tragedy, and our thoughts all go out to those who have lost their lives together with their friends and their families. I'm grateful for advance sight of the statement, and I agree that greater cooperation to tackle the dreadful criminal people smuggling gangs is required. However, this awful event should also signal a massive shift in approach to provision of safe legal routes to the UK, not doubling down on criminalising those who are the victims if they get here with up to 4 years in prison. This government's refugee family reunion rules are among the most restrictive in Europe. The DUB scheme was closed, and Brexit means that the so-called Dublin family reunion applications are no longer possible. Resettlement schemes are in limbo. The Borders Bill will restrict family reunion rights even further, meaning more people will feel compelled to make dangerous journeys to join loved ones. The reality is that offshoring is a disgrace. Will she publish the economic impact assessment for the bill, which presumably will confirm that it will waste billions of pounds and not work? And instead of blocking and closing down safe routes, we should be expanding them. So my question is quite simple. Will she commit today to ending all discussion of the UK using dangerous and life-threatening pushback tactics in the Channel? The Prime Minister said yesterday that all options were on the table in addressing this crisis. Will she confirm that this will include looking at the one measure which would make an immediate difference, allowing refugees and asylum seekers to make their initial application from outside the UK, rather than forcing people to physically travel here to begin their applications?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say I'm very disappointed by the honourable gentleman's tone, comments, and his actual inability to understand the situation as to what is taking place around global illegal migration issues and challenges. First of all, I will restate to the honourable gentleman, if he thinks that there is a simple solution, there is no simple solution. And if he thinks settlement schemes that have existed previously are the answer, that is also not the answer. And if he has bothered to read the Nationality and Borders Bill, he should also look at the new plan for immigration. And importantly, some of the wider reforms that are required to our asylum system, so that our asylum system actually becomes fit for purpose, so that it meets the needs of people that are claiming asylum, that we have a differentiated approach to stop economic migrants masquerading as asylum seekers and elbowing women and children who need help and support out of the way, which is effectively what is happening right now. So safe and legal routes, absolutely. And if he'd only joined in previous debates or even in previous statements and questions, and I'm not sure if he was here on Monday in the House, he would have heard me say, not just on Monday, but in fact when I launched a new plan for immigration back in February, the very purpose of safe and legal routes is actually so we create the right kind of resettlement path for people who are fleeing persecution and oppression in countries for a range of reasons, a whole host of reasons, and the world is changing and there's a great deal of instability out there. But in doing so, that will create them a legal path to make their claim from outside of the United Kingdom, so they won't have to come here. And then when they do come here, they are literally supported in the right way in terms of accommodation, resettlement, so that they can start their new life in the United Kingdom. That is exactly how safe and legal routes should work. That is why I'm working with the IOM and UNHCR and other partners on this. And I think it's such a shame, actually, that once again, the SNP, a party that has failed to support asylum seekers in their own local authorities, Madam Deputy Speaker. 31 out of 32 local authorities have not even, they may sit there and yell shame at me, but 31 out of 32 local authorities, Madam Deputy Speaker, do not participate in the voluntary dispersal scheme for housing asylum seekers. So there is an inconsistency here, if I may say so, in their approach. And I'm absolutely in agreement on the need for safe and legal routes. This government will do it properly while we recognise the type of instability and uncertainty and persecution and oppression that people that need to claim asylum and should be claiming asylum in our country are currently not getting, and we will change that.
David Davis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think the whole House knows that my right honourable friend has strained every sinew since her first day in post to prevent the sorts of tragedies we saw in the last 24 hours. She's also right, and my right honourable friend's right, to point to the pan-European nature of this problem. Frontex, for example, have quadrupled their expenditure on surveillance alone in the Mediterranean in the last year. And she's quite accurately pointed to her ongoing cooperation with the French as central to this. So can she tell the House what additional measures she's offered the French in order to crack down on these evil gangs and cut down this deadly trade?
Well, my right honourable friend makes some very, very important points, and my right honourable friend also mentions Frontex. The role of Frontex actually is to see how they have actually accelerated surveillance, but even border patrols. They are even, Madam Deputy Speaker, supporting activity in the Mediterranean in terms of stopping boats entering territorial waters illegally as well. And I've seen those patrols myself. I have seen them. So it's a complete myth and fallacy to say that we shouldn't look at all options. We are, and we will continue to do so. But in terms of measures that have been offered to France, absolutely. I mean, I've asked them today for an honest assessment in terms of their own numbers on the beaches, whether or not there are gaps, if more officers are needed, a realistic assessment in terms of the number of migrants that are coming through from Belgium in particular. And Minister Darmanin specifically mentions the pressures from that border and the boats that were the fatalities, with the fatalities yesterday, they came from Dunkirk. So clearly there are more flows there. But absolutely, more police officers, more intelligence cooperation, more on technology. So we have put forward a very, very significant technology offer, which does include enhanced surveillance. It does include AMPR on the roads coming up to the beaches. We've also offered to put more officers unwarranted, because they will not take warranted officers. But these are the things that I will be working through very specifically now, because the status quo cannot persist. And I think, there's a full understanding of this on the French side. And as I'd say to the House, the one thing we absolutely are as a government, we are incredibly propositional to France in particular. We have to find joint solutions. And if it means actually doing more with France and persuading them to take on more support, we will absolutely strain every sinew to do so.
Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and our hearts go out to all those affected by yesterday's terrible tragedy. But there was already deep concern in my constituency about the government's approach to protecting men, women and children seeking refuge in the UK. And I also have many constituents with family members in fear of their lives and seeking to escape Afghanistan following the Taliban takeover. A new resettlement pathway for vulnerable Afghans was announced in August, but 3 months later, we still don't know when the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme will be operational, or how those who are outside the UK will be able to access it. So please, can the Home Secretary tell us today?
Well, the Honourable Lady makes very important points about the Afghan resettlement scheme, and it was announced in August at a time of great crisis, obviously with Putin actually taking place at the time. My honourable friend, the Minister for the Afghan resettlement scheme, will be updating colleagues in due course on this. I would, however, Madam Deputy Speaker, like to just emphasise to colleagues though, with Operation Putin, we evacuated 15,000 people. We are still in the process of trying to resettle them. And in terms of resettling more people for Afghanistan, and I know the cases are coming through, and across government, it's FCDO and MOD with the Arup cases. There are still Arup cases that are being followed through with the MOD. We are trying to make sure that we can, again, bring people forward. When we bring people forward, that we can get them settled, rather than what we have seen sadly, and we're very, very upfront about this as well, being put into hotels, inadequate accommodation, and we need them in the community.
Sir Edward Lee.
What an appalling and entirely foreseeable tragedy. Will the Home Secretary agree with me that we cannot wait on her excellent bill? We cannot wait on the French cooperating with us and taking these poor people back, as they should. We have to act now in a national emergency to save lives. There are only 2 countries in the world who have solved this problem. Australia, which has an offshore processing centre, and Greece that does pushback. We have to be tough. We have to face down the human rights lawyers. If governments are weak, people die.
Deputy Speaker, well, just in response to my right honourable friend's colleagues, I echo his frustration fully. Now, in terms of toughness, I've been very clear, and I know this does upset some right honourable and honourable members in this House. I have not ruled anything out. And I put every option on the table, not just with France, by the way, but with other counterparts. Greece, in terms of pushbacks, they actually have special forces, they use their military, they use the Hellenic Coast Guard, and they use Frontex as well, just for the record for this House. As I said, I've seen that. They also have a programme of reception centres, which my right honourable friend will know and is aware of. That is part of the plan for the new plan for immigration as well, in terms of how we have differentiation, how we deal with the reform of the asylum system, and casework progressing as well. The fact of the matter is, there is no one silver bullet solution to this, and I know he understands this, and I know my colleagues do as well. That is why the new plan for immigration is important, and the Nationality and Borders Bill. All colleagues will hear shortly in terms of the bill coming back to report stage in this House and the next stages with that bill. That bill is an important piece of legislation, Madam Deputy Speaker, because it will set the direction of travel, and importantly it will give the government more powers to actually be much, much firmer, and it will end many of the pull factors that have existed for too long and actually have helped to facilitate and encourage illegal migration.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Home Secretary accept that the only way in which people traffickers and gangs can operate is because of the absolute desperation of people across Europe and indeed across the world? And instead of concentrating on more frontiers, more barbed wire, more surveillance and so on, not just in this country but all across Europe, what we should be doing is looking at the causes of asylum in the first place, the environmental disasters, the wars, the abuse of human rights, the poverty. And what are we doing to ensure that the European Convention and the UN conventions are actually adhered to and upheld? Those asylum seekers are desperate people trying to survive in this world. Pushing them back is not a solution. It is brutality that will go down in history as the brutal treatment of desperate people at a desperate time.
Yeah. Secretary.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for his comments, and first and foremost, there is a great deal of work, and I just should emphasise this as well. I mean, his comments are really sort of put presented in a light that actually is quite unfair and unreflective of the work that takes place across government in terms of multilateral organisations, the global situations. Humanitarian crises lead to displacement, climate crises lead to displacement. That is a fact of life. None of this is new, and it's existed for decades and decades. And that is why the international community does come together, whether it's in convening power, through the European Union, through the UN multilateral system. That is exactly how it works. But the reality is as well, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is not the case that everyone that has come to this country illegally, whether it's in the back of lorries or small boats historically, are asylum seekers. Well, when they have their rights exhausted and then we try to remove them, there are many, many barriers to removal, and that is effectively what the Nationality and Borders Bill will address. And I appreciate the honourable gentleman in the corner doesn't want to support the bill. But at the same time, migrants are not just in the hands of people smugglers. They are travelling through safe countries where there are functioning asylum seekers in these safe countries where they could claim asylum. And of course, that also is something that all international partners should be supporting and working to achieve.
Dr. Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Didn't the Honourable Lady opposite put her finger on the problem when she referred to Afghanistan, where there are many legitimate asylum seekers who deserve to come here? And isn't the problem that if you have the fairest asylum-seeking system in the world, a queue will form, and there will always be some people who are not prepared to queue but want to jump to the head of the queue? And therefore, isn't the only way to deter that to show not that they won't get across the channel, not that getting across the channel is terribly dangerous, but that if they do get across the channel and they have jumped the queue, they will be returned to another country? How can she secure that?
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I've spoken in this House a few times now about returns agreements and the difficulties around getting bilateral returns agreements. I state again, for the record, that I have put on the table, another offer to my French counterpart, Minister Darmanin, today, that we will discuss. I'm very happy to discuss returns agreements with him in the usual sense, but also to look at family reunions. and children, unaccompanied asylum-seeking children as well. We don't want kids. We do not want to see children and family members be in the hands of traffickers, and having these established routes and working with our partners to establish returns agreements is absolutely the right thing to do. I have stated many times before with regards to EU countries, this is a matter that sits with the Commission. It is a Commission competence. There is a great deal of frustration amongst EU member states on this issue, which is why I will continue and am continuing to pursue my discussions with the Commissioner for Home Affairs.
Patrick Grady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I hope she can confirm that there's no such thing as an illegal asylum seeker. Seeking asylum is a human right, and when she says that people should seek asylum in the first safe country that they come to, she can confirm that that's an aspect of the government's hostile environment policy and not a legal or treaty requirement in any international obligation. And on top of all of that, at what point can the UK ever be the first safe country, given that this island is surrounded by water? What are the routes by which the United Kingdom can be the first safe country in which a displaced asylum seeker arrives here?
The Honourable Gentleman actually misses a fundamental point. About the asylum system and the whole issue about people who come to the country who are not actually genuine asylum seekers, who are masquerading as asylum system. We do know, actually, we do know. And there are many, many cases. And I think also, Madam Deputy Speaker, there has to be a recognition. This actually shows how detached the Honourable Gentleman is from the real world. We cannot have a policy where we can accommodate everyone. And to play back a bit of EU rhetoric and language back to him, the concept of burden share, which is why we actually do seek to work with our counterparts, and we do cooperate with other countries, and we do continue to work in a constructive manner around returns agreements. We do also seek to change our laws so that individuals are not constantly using the appeals process and the UK legal aid system as well to frustrate the ability of the government to remove people from our country who have no legal basis to stay in our country. I really do think the Honourable Gentleman really misses the point, and in particular, at a time when we know that there is a major global migration crisis, we have to find collective solutions to this problem and not just take the ideological approach that the gentleman is taking.
Florence Ashalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. So yesterday was a very sad day, and I think all of us would have been moved seeing those reports. And for me, as I put my children to bed yesterday, I just thought about the conditions that that poor child went through. And we cannot allow this situation to be exploited by those pushing the anti-immigration agenda. And I welcome the Home Secretary saying that she will look at all options and that she's having those discussions in terms of operational and diplomatic to bring down those people smugglers. And I welcome her comment in that looking at safe routes. But will she please look at maybe another option in terms of providing a humanitarian visa scheme so that people don't have to get on these boats? They are seeking safety and refuge for their families. That's another option that the Home Secretary could look at.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, there are also lots of options that we could all look at, but we need the legal frameworks to do some of this as well. And that is why I'm bringing forward the Nationality and Borders Bill.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The tragedy in the Channel draws into sharp focus an issue about which we have no doubt of the Home Secretary's determined intentions, illustrated by a Borders Bill, which will go some way to fixing a broken asylum system, gamed by traffickers, by economic migrants and by rights lawyers. But she needs to go further. And that's why the Common Sense Group of MPs have written to her saying we need to disrupt those criminal gangs, we need offshore processing of claims, and we need to turn around boats in the Channel, as the law allows us to do. For people who voted to take back control have every right to ask the question, if you can't protect the integrity of the borders, what can you control?
I thank my right honourable friend for his comments, and he will know that within the bill as well, he mentions offshoring, third country. These are all options that are under consideration, and the bill does actually, new plan for immigration covers those areas. He's absolutely right in terms of the principal point that he made, which is why we are determined, and we will not just stop and cease with the measures that we've already announced. We will look to augment and enhance some of the measures as well, because at the state of crisis that I think we're seeing with global migration issues right now, and the appalling loss of life and deaths that we have seen, it's incumbent upon everyone, governments and law enforcement, border controls, all the various agencies to come together to stop this awful trade in human trafficking.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I thank the Home Secretary for the content and the tone with which she has delivered her statement today. Does she agree with me that dealing with these criminal gangs of people smugglers, we are dealing with, in every sense, the modern-day equivalent of the slave traders of yore? And will she ensure that the full force and diligence of the intelligence services and the security services working with their counterparts in friendly states are brought together to address this terrible challenge? And to prevent further such tragedies as we saw yesterday, can my right honourable friend see any reason to object to processing asylum claims at all British embassies so that those who have a successful claim, which are the significant majority of those arriving by boat, can come here in a legal and humane way once asylum has been granted, rather than risking their lives just for the chance to file paperwork in the first place?
Well, my right friend makes some very, very important and valid points. And first and foremost, he will absolutely know, and I do agree with him, we are seeing what is now modern-day slave trade. There is no question about that. Which is why, Madam Deputy Speaker, the full force, as my right honourable friend says, of our intelligence, security, law enforcement partners and agencies, not just in the UK or in France, but upstream. And my right honourable friend will be very, very familiar with the footprint that government has, particularly in other countries upstream, and places like Africa, for example, as well, where there is a great deal of work that takes place to stop smuggling of people and the human trafficking that has taken place. And in terms of processing outside of the United Kingdom, this is very much part of the process that we are looking at now in terms of safe and legal routes, but also creating the right kind of parameters and working with many of the humanitarian aid agencies that my right honourable friend will be familiar with, who have led much of the safe and legal routes and resettlement schemes around the world.
Brendan O'Hara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, may I add my voice to those sending their condolences to the families and loved ones of those who died in this unspeakable tragedy. But last night I tuned into the BBC 10 o'clock news to get the latest on this terrible disaster, and I was absolutely appalled when the presenter informed me that around 30 migrants had drowned. Madam Deputy Speaker, migrants don't drown. People drown. Men, women and children drown. So will the Secretary of State join me in asking the BBC News editorial team and any other news outlet thinking of using that term to reflect on their use of such dehumanising language and afford these poor people the respect that they deserve?
Secretary.
In terms of language that is used, and we see a lot, we hear a lot, and even during the Afghanistan operations are not pitting, I heard a lot of language that quite frankly seemed to be inappropriate around people who are fleeing. So yes, I will.
Steve Baker.
Deputy Speaker, I think people in Wickham would expect the government to act with absolute resolve to get a grip of this problem, but also compassion to save life and look after people. Can she reassure me that that is her policy, to look after people but get a grip of this problem?
Absolutely reassure my honourable friend on not just, it's more than grip, I think, in terms of the approach that we are taking. The use of the word grip, we've just been speaking about language, is quite a simplistic term, actually, when we think about the complexity of this issue. This is a very, very complicated issue, and it requires action across a whole plethora of areas. But humanity and decency is absolutely crucial. And without labouring the point, Madam Deputy Speaker, this does come back to how people are treated when they come to our country, how we accommodate them, and how we support them. And this is what we want to change through the National Anti-Borders Bill, because we can do things better. Our system is broken, and it's incumbent that we actually apply a whole range of skills, experience and knowledge to actually provide a better system.
Chiomura.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And it is truly heartbreaking to think of the lives, the hopes, the talents extinguished by the sea in their journey to our shores. A journey the Home Secretary characterises as unnecessary. But could I gently say to her that when men, women and children getting into the boat clearly didn't think so, and we see more boats arriving today. So will the Home Secretary acknowledge that her policies are not working and that vulnerable people are paying the price, and that what we need is safe, secure and fair routes into this country, and she has failed to put them in place?
Madam Deputy Speaker, in response to the Honourable Lady, that is exactly what the Nationality and Borders Bill does.
Robert Jenrick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy. I support my right honourable friend in pursuing all long-term options, including offshore processing, which I think will play an important part. But would she agree with me that in the short term, we will see more tragedies like this unless we can agree a strategy with the French? And it is within the gift of the President of France to bring this to an end now. That will require more action by them, but it must be in our mutual interests, because the more people who cross the Channel, the more people will come to France.
Absolutely right, and hence the discussion that took place between the Prime Minister and President Macron last night. We have been absolutely assiduous and forthright in making these points to our counterparts in France over the last 2 years. And the offers, Madam Deputy Speaker, you've heard the offers that we put forward to President Macron, the Interior Minister, the whole machinery of the French government. We absolutely encourage them and urge them to take these offers forward. They may not be perfect, but that's not the point. We need to deploy every single tool that we have to save lives and to prevent the loss of life, and that's effectively what this is now about.
Rachel Master.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is absolutely tragic. 27 people, including children and a pregnant woman, desperate for a safe future, were killed while being exploited. It's nothing short of murder. The Foreign Affairs Select Committee 2 years ago concluded that closing down safe routes drives people into the hands of people smugglers. So will she immediately withdraw her dangerous Nationality and Borders Bill, which does just that, and put in place safe routes of passage to avoid more tragedies?
Deputy Speaker is no, and that's effectively the Nationality and Borders Bill does create safe and legal routes.
Sir Christopher Cho.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my right honourable friend said at the end of her statement that crossing the Channel in a small boat is illegal. Would that it was, but it isn't illegal, as that was confirmed by the Crown Prosecution Service on the 8th of July. What would make it illegal would be passing into law my Illegal Immigration Offences Bill, which is due for second reading tomorrow, and I should be grateful if my right honourable friend could agree to meet me to discuss the contents of that bill and how that will contribute to what we all want to see, which is an end to this vile trade.
I think there is absolutely more that needs to be done, so ministers will be happy to meet the right honourable.
Alan Cairns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On Monday, I shared my concern to the Home Secretary that the French authorities potentially turning a blind eye to some of the activities going on on the northern coast of France were putting some of the most vulnerable people at risk. Sadly, that tragedy emerged yesterday, and it's encouraging to see that 5 people were arrested overnight. But those 5 people were active yesterday, last week, last month and probably last year. Now, I recognise the diplomacy that's required, but can I urge my right honourable friend to use every effort to bring the newfound urgency together, to work across government, across authority, to ensure that all possible action is taken to combat the actions of these people smugglers?
My friend, for his question, he is of course absolutely right. There is arrests have been made, and it's not for me to comment in detail in terms of the type of arrests and the type of work that's taking place. But let me assure my right honourable friend in the House, certainly for the last 2 years, the level of intelligence sharing, both in the UK and in France, and further than France as well, because we do go much further than France on intelligence sharing, has been absolutely pivotal to arrests and convictions and smashing up gangs. There has been a lot of outstanding and good work that has taken place. And I think if I remember rightly, on Monday, I might have alluded to a really big case last week where an Albanian criminal was prosecuted. So there is a lot of work that takes place. I have to say, these outcomes are not always reported as well. They're not always reported. But collectively, there have been some very, very significant arrests and prosecutions.
Deirdre Brock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I believe COSLA has written to the Home Secretary seeking an urgent meeting regarding her recent attacks on Scottish councils and their responsibilities to asylum seekers. And I would urge her to take up that offer so she can have a few home truths about the situation relayed to her. But does she agree that now is also the time, in the face of this absolutely appalling tragedy, to stop talking about this as simply being a French or a UK issue and instead address it as an international or global issue, if you like, and that it is vital that disputes over Northern Ireland and fishing are treated entirely separately from working together to find a joint solution?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I take issue with the comments from the Honourable Lady. First of all, for her information, the Immigration Minister met with COSLA on Monday and these issues were not raised and did not come up. Secondly, when it comes to the actual issue of migration, I've never said that it's a UK-France issue at all. I've always said it's a global issue. There's no point pointing to my colleagues. You were putting your question, the Honourable Lady was putting the question directly to me. I have always said and maintained that it is a global crisis. And actually, I've always been proactive in speaking to my counterparts across EU member states and other countries, and I've even hosted meetings with them as well. So I think having that context is equally as important.
Diana Johnson.
Deputy Speaker, this is the most awful tragedy, and I would like to add my condolences to all those who have been affected. But it's right to say, isn't it, that the Home Office has failed to get a grip of this issue for far too long. And in a week when the Home Affairs Select Committee has recommended that the Windrush compensation scheme should be removed from the Home Office because of issues of competency, isn't it now time that this matter should also be removed from the Home Office, given to the Cabinet Office, and there should be a cross-government response?
For the benefit of the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a cross-government response to this.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And whilst we don't know the details or nationalities of those that sadly lost their lives in the Channel yesterday, we do know that very large numbers of people who are refugees from the oppressive, brutal regime in Iran are desperately seeking to cross the Channel to come to this country. Can she look at the example that has been set by the Albanian government, who've moved satisfactorily Camp Liberty from Iran into Camp Ashraf, and is as a model of how to treat people who are refugees in the closest country possible to the Iranian border? That is somehow we can set up these sort of camps and opportunities for people fleeing from those regimes rather than them being forced to take this perilous journey.
Well, my honourable friend makes what is, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think a highly, highly relevant and important point. And at times of crises, of global migration crisis, and if we think back actually not that long ago to 2014-15, our policy and approach, and internationally supported as well, was to keep people within the region. And I am referring, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the Syrian crisis, where we worked with counterparts, and we are still working with counterparts and colleagues in Jordan and neighbouring countries in the region. There was a great deal of work that took place. But the sadness of all of this is it took a migration crisis and tragedies of the loss of life for the international community to convene and coalesce and come together in that way. All I can say right now is that the British government and I are working night and day to bring partners together to recognise that no one country can solve this on their own. And that is why we need stronger cooperation across the board now so that we can address these issues together.
Rosie Duffield.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the people of East Kent are horrified and deeply upset by what the Chief Rabbi this morning called an unspeakable tragedy happening on our shores. We should be ashamed too that amongst the dead was a soldier who served alongside British Armed Forces personnel and reportedly felt unable to wait any longer for help to come, not an illegal migrant. I think the Home Secretary would agree. Will the government please act not simply to repel those human beings desperate enough to risk this incredibly dangerous crossing, but to immediately open the Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme and safe family reunion routes to prevent more deaths like this?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady, to my comments earlier on both of those points.
Julie Morrison.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We've seen consistently with Afghanistan and Hong Kong that the British people react with incredible generosity of spirit to people who are fleeing persecution, oppression and conflict. Does my right honourable friend agree that the safe and legal routes that she's referred to consistently and which are central and integral to the Nationality and Borders Bill are vital, but they also have to be the only viable route into the UK to preserve life, of course, but also to retain the support of the British public and the integrity of our asylum system, which is what we all want to see.
Absolutely right and spot on, Madam Deputy Speaker. So the changes that the government have brought in, we are very clear about legal routes and also the issues, and we're very open and honest. For 20 years, the asylum system has just remained in aspic. It has not been touched, it has not been reformed, and it needs reforming. And with that, of course, we have set up resettlement routes, Hong Kongers, BNOs. Look at the way that scheme has worked. It has been phenomenal, and it's incredibly moving to see how people have been resettled across the United Kingdom. As well with Afghanistan, and there are many other schemes as well, Syrian refugees that have come over too. We need to build upon those successes and do the right thing for people that are fleeing persecution, because it is that bond of trust with the British public as well. The British public are warm and generous, and we need to deliver for them, but we cannot be walked all over by other countries that are not stepping up, taking their responsibilities, and which is why we have to continue with this cooperation that we have with all our neighbours.
Jim Shanahan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for her commitment to finding a solution for this, and it's very clear that the Honourable Lady is doing just that. My heart aches at the lost lives that have now become a reality, sadly, today. On behalf of my party, the DUP, I convey my sincere sympathies to all those who grieve for their loved ones who they've lost over the last time. Would the Minister consider utilising private patrol companies offering services with boats ready and equipped to help the patrol of the sea, such as one who has contacted and emailed me to highlight a dairy facility called Azores Marine Solutions? Is there a role, Secretary of State, for private enterprise in helping the fight against these dangerous crossings? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The answer is yes, there is a role, and the Home Office has been tasked to look at private sector companies and support. And in fact, even with my French counterpart this morning, I've once again, not for the first time, put that offer on the table as well to have other contractors to join the collective efforts.
Philip Hollowburn.
Against the background of British troops being sent to Poland to help secure the border with Belarus, can the Home Secretary confirm and clarify the basis of her broad and generous offer to the French? Has she offered border force cutters to work close to shore off the French coast in conjunction with the French? And has she offered the deployment of British troops and UK police, if necessary, under French command, to operate on French beaches?
Yes, Madam Deputy Speaker, I have.
David Simmons.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first commend the Home Secretary on her very robust response to the SNP. The London Borough of Hillingdon is currently buckling under the strain of looking after around 10% of the refugees in the whole country, including large numbers bussed up from Dover, and almost none of those people have a route to Scotland. But may I ask my right honourable friend that, recognising the importance of safe and legal routes and the comments made by the French Foreign Minister about some of the pull factors in the UK, will she consider what steps could be brought forward to remove a grant of asylum from those whose claim is subsequently shown to have been bogus?
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. First of all, I would just like to put on the record actually my thanks to the London Borough of Hillingdon and also to many other local authorities, Madam Deputy Speaker, across the country, but they are predominantly in London. London is feeling the pressure in terms of accommodation, hotels and housing. And he is right, of course, in terms of his own suggestion, in terms of moving forward on solutions, but actually working together. And, you know, this is exactly why we are looking to reform the system through the Nationality and Borders Bill. We have to have that differentiation.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Lives are tragically being lost in the Channel, and the British people want these gangs smashed, the crossing stopped, and people processed in the nearest country. The opposition have voted again and again against our measures in the Nationality and Borders Bill to cut down on human trafficking via small boats, and the Shadow Home Secretary has called our proposals unconscionable. In my local area, the local Labour Party and the Lib Dems, none of whom I see here today, are even campaigning against an immigration removal centre for foreign criminals and failed asylum seekers. Does the Home Secretary agree with me that Labour's failure to support the necessary legislation shows that when the chips are down, that they not only don't understand the views of the British people, but tragically are failing to protect those being exploited by criminal gangs, whose callous and criminal behaviour means people are left to die in the Channel?
My honourable friend makes some very, very important points here, and obviously in terms of the removal centre, we have removal centres for very, very good and strong reasons, Madam Deputy Speaker. These are people with no legal rights to remain in our country, and there are reasons as to why we have to put them in removal centres to, you know, with the processes that we have to get to move them on. But the fundamental point here is, of course, the reforms that we are trying to bring in, which are being thwarted by the party opposite. And actually, by stopping these changes and reforms, they're only playing into the hands of the people smugglers and those, quite frankly, who are being put in the hands of the traffickers.
And finally, the prize for patience and perseverance goes to Duncan Baker.
Madam Deputy, that will teach me for being last in as well. Can I say that the situation yesterday was an absolute tragedy, but it's absolutely clear what the Home Secretary has said in her words. There is no single silver bullet to fix this problem. Would she agree with me that broadly there are around 3 huge areas to cover? Number one is international cooperation has got to be there to work together with other countries. The domestic legislation has to be put in place, which is what we are doing through the Nationality and Borders Bill to fix our borders and to fix the broken asylum system. And lastly, we need the toughest possible measures to crack down on the surveillance and the criminality of those gangs who are, quite frankly, just aiding and abetting the situation every day.
He's absolutely right, and I thank him for his comments because he's summed up the totality of the challenge that confronts us all, has existed for a long period of time, and that's exactly why we are attempting to fix the broken system by tackling these issues, the gangs at source, going upstream, using intelligence, fixing the system here in the United Kingdom, and of course our continued work with our counterparts around the world.
Thank you. Point of order, Dr. Alan Whitehead.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, in the urgent question on bulb going into special administration, the Business Secretary told my honourable friend, the member for Rhondda, after refusing to answer a question from my right honourable friend, the Shadow Business Secretary, that, and I quote, there is no government bailout. Yet we learned from a court hearing on the same day, indeed on the front page of the Telegraph and other papers today, that the taxpayer is on the hook for as much as £1.7 billion as a result of this government's failure to properly regulate the energy market. I ask your guidance, Madam Deputy Speaker. Is it right and proper for a government minister to say one thing to this House and another thing to the courts? And also, Madam Deputy Speaker, whether you have any guidance about how the Business Secretary can be brought back to this House to explain why he has misled it in his answers to the UQ of yesterday.
Order. Order. Although I'm not listening to sedentary comments, I don't need to be reminded. I hope that the honourable gentleman will come back to the dispatch box and find other words for his last sentence. I'm quite sure that no right honourable member of this House could have misled it.
I thank the Deputy Speaker for her guidance on this matter, and of course I withdraw the question of misleading the House. I hope the Business Secretary will come to the House to explain his comments in the due course of time.
I thank the honourable gentleman. That is a perfectly polite and in order question. However, It is not a point of order for the Chair, as I think the Honourable Gentleman knows. Ministers are, of course, responsible for the content of their speeches and answers at the dispatch box, and the Chair has no control over such matters. If, however, the Honourable Gentleman wishes to take the matter further and to require the Secretary of State in question to come back to the House and revisit the matter on which he is in disagreement with the said Minister, then I suggest that he visits the clerks in the table office, who will give him some advice on how he might go about that. And I'm also sure that the Treasury bench will have heard, and I have assent from the Minister who is now at the dispatch box, the Treasury bench have heard what the Honourable Gentleman has said, and I trust that his concerns will be brought to the attention of the appropriate Secretary of State, and that the matter will be revisited and, if necessary, clarified. I trust that satisfies the Honourable Gentleman. Thank you. We now come to the backbench debate on freedom of religion or belief and the 40th anniversary of the UN Declaration on the Elimination of Religious Intolerance. I call Fiona Bruce to open the debate.
Speaker, and may I start by thanking the many colleagues attending today's debate and the Backbench Business Committee for granting time for it. To help signpost colleagues, I hope to speak for no more than 20 minutes. MPs have effectively challenged successive governments over the years to increase engagement on freedom of religion or belief, or FORB as I shall term it, and indeed on FORB for all, whatever one's religion, or indeed if one has no religion at all. Parliamentarians have raised the importance of the recognition of FORB as a UK human rights concern. And it's only as I've been working internationally on this subject since my appointment last December as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief that I have come to understand in the international context the importance that our parliamentarians play and have played over many years in their cross-party commitment to this subject. In this, we are showing global leadership. I was told by those arranging a conference on FORB in another not-so-small country that they struggled to get just 3 elected representatives to speak on a panel about it. But our all-party group, under its tireless leadership in the Commons of the Honourable Member for Strangford, is one of the most active and largest APPGs, with now 143 members. One of the key elements, and there are 3 on the FCDO website, of my mandate as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy is, and I quote, to bring together UK efforts to promote religious tolerance abroad. And so it's absolutely right that I engage in this role with the APPG, although I am also a Vice Chair. And I want to thank its stakeholders who facilitated the appointment of a strong, indeed recently strengthened group of staff to support the APPG. And just yesterday together, we hosted an event here in Parliament attended by very many MPs, and I do want to thank them all, not least the COP26 President and Cabinet Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Reading West, for attending. It was an event to mark Red Wednesday, the day dedicated to shining a light on the persecution of Christians across the world and standing up for the faith and freedom of all. A day when we light up public buildings like the FCDO Red, to remember in particular those who've made the ultimate sacrifice for their beliefs. And this year, for the first time, I understand Lambeth Palace was lit up. I thank the Archbishop of Canterbury for that and for his concern for FORB. Yesterday, we heard in person from victims of FORB abuses, of the suffering of the Hazaras in Afghanistan, of the widespread persecution of the Baha'is. And as today also marks the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, we were reminded of the double jeopardy many women face across the world, persecuted and discriminated against as a result of their faith and their gender, which was articulated so harrowingly in the report published yesterday by Aid to the Church in Need, entitled Hear Their Cries. Indeed, After reading that report myself, I had to simply sit down and cry. I'll certainly give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm a huge admirer of my right honourable friend and the work that she does in this field. I'm actually trying to help a Hazara Afghan woman who successfully got abroad into Pakistan undocumented, but who even now has to remain in hiding lest our Pakistani friends and allies, in inverted commas, discover her and send her back to the tender mercies of the Taliban. Isn't this a good illustration of what she's talking about?
Very much so. And if the Honourable Member would like to give me more details, I will certainly pass them on appropriately. Through the APPG and inspired by my now appointed by the Prime Minister Deputy Special Envoy David Burrows, whom I thank for his wise and unstinting work on FORB over many years, we've initiated this year a Prisoners of Conscience programme, which enables those across the world imprisoned simply on account of what they believe to be virtually adopted by an individual MP who commits to advocating on their behalf ongoing. The aim is, with the prisoners' full agreement, to highlight their cases, as well as the situation of all who are unjustly imprisoned as a result of their faith or belief. I invite colleagues to offer to partner. Please contact the APPG. And through my parliamentary office, I'm also launching a campaign titled End the Persecution. I invite all parliamentary colleagues to contact my office for the toolkit which will be available for MPs to use in constituencies to hold meetings and raise awareness amongst the wider public of the egregious infringements of FORB across the world, of which so often the public still is unaware, and so that they in turn can become ambassadors. In particular, we want to encourage the next generation to champion FORB, and that's why the End the Persecution campaign will have a focus on creating young ambassadors for FORB. And two, with regard to the work in my parliamentary office, as distinct from my work with the FCDO, which I will mention later, my role does, of course, however, very much straddle three legs of a stool: Parliament, the public, working with civil society and NGO engagement, and working with FCDO. But with regard, for a moment still, my parliamentary office, we've conducted intensive deep dives into countries over the past few months, into countries where violations of FORB are egregious or of key concern. In effect, these have been virtual visits for me, whilst in-person visits have, of course, been impractical due to the pandemic for much of this year. We focused on a number of countries, speaking to dozens of witnesses who provided us with first-hand evidence of the state and concerns about FORB in their countries. And these have provided invaluable feedback to the FCDO. These deep dives have helped informed advocacy, and recognising this, I'm pleased that some FCDO desk officers have started to observe our deep dives. We learnt of personal experiences from those on the ground in Nigeria, Myanmar, Eritrea and Afghanistan, where we've conducted deep dives. Can I just briefly present some of the shocking things that have been shared? In Nigeria, marginalisation and persecution of religious minorities has in many areas become institutionalised, from girls being forcibly married and converted to people denied gaining public office because of their faith. In Myanmar, human rights organisations report that since the military coup and pandemic, those experiencing persecution due to their original belief have been increasingly targeted, denied access to key services, and occasionally forced into unjust arrest, where they are tortured horrifically. In Eritrea, those arrested are reportedly held in makeshift detentions. Many prisoners are held in shipping containers where they can be at risk of being burnt to death in the heat of the day and then frozen at night. Many go mad with the suffering. Others are held in literally holes in the ground. Upwards of up to 20,000 people held within camps, many beaten, including pregnant women beaten around the womb. And in Afghanistan, we spoke directly with members of several religious communities, including Christians, Sikhs, Muslims, Hazaras, and the NGOs supporting them. Those that do not submit to the beliefs of the Taliban are frequently at risk of their lives. Some indeed have lost them. We heard of some 1,000 Hazaras thrown out of their homes, wandering the countryside, a dozen or so found by others beheaded at the roadside. Relocation and resettlement schemes urgently need to include religious minorities. And as we've just heard earlier from my colleague, refugees who fled to neighbouring countries continue to be vulnerable. I turn now to the Truro Review. The second part of my published mandate is to support implementation of the Bishop of Truro's recommendations to the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office support for persecuted Christians around the world. And I should say that, of course, this work does improve work not just for persecuted Christians, but for the FCDO work for all those who are persecuted around the world, whatever their faiths or none. I want to thank my right honourable friend, the member for South West Surrey, the former Foreign Secretary, for initiating this review, and the Bishop of Truro's continued strong commitment for FORB. Both of them have been of great support to me in my role. To oversee the implementation of the review, I hold regular meetings with officials, and indeed with the Bishop, to ensure that the 22 recommendations will be implemented in full, both in word and spirit, by the deadline of early next July. And I'm pleased that the FCDO indicate that delivery of over half of the recommendations are making good progress, and that we are on track, that delivery of over half has occurred, and that we are on good progress with the remainder, and that we're on track to deliver all by July 2022, in line with our manifesto commitment. Let me highlight a few. Recommendation 6. The last time we debated FORB in this place, there was concern expressed by a number of colleagues cross-party as to the support for my own role, and indeed Recommendation 6 does indicate that there should be suitable instruments and roles to monitor and implement the approach to Truro, establishing permanently and in perpetuity the role of the Special Envoy for Freedom of Religion or Belief, with appropriate resources and authority to work across FCDO departments, supported by a Director General level champion for FORB. Now, I'm pleased to report to the House that since those concerns were expressed, there has been significant movement to provide more dedicated official support for my role, not least by the appointment of our former colleague David Burrows as Deputy Special Envoy. And together we can press on to ensure that we make most of the opportunities of the next 8 months to build on Truro progress. Regarding Recommendation 2, this year FORB was included in the G7 communique for the first time, laying the foundations for further collaborations within this group. Recommendation 8, the Global Human Rights Sanction Regime. In March, the Foreign Secretary announced sanctions alongside the US, Canada and the EU against perpetrators of gross human rights violations against Uyghurs and other minorities in Xinjiang. I look forward to further sanctions specifically targeted at individuals who violate FORB. This is much needed. Recommendation 20. We've used our position at the UN Security Council to raise awareness on persecution of religious minorities in conflict, and Lord Ahmed hosted a successful ARIA meeting in the margins of the Security Council in March. Recommendation 14, freedom of religion or belief, is a key theme of the annual Human Rights and Democracy reports and will continue to be so in future. I would like to see greater integration of FORB with the reports on other human rights, as they are, of course, so interrelated. I think, for example, of the rights to associate, freedom of speech, and of course other rights such as media freedoms. Recommendation 11, religion training. With Lord Ahmed, I launched the core training unit on religion for international engagement earlier this year, recommended for all FCDO staff, in particular essential for FCDO officials in relevant diplomatic posts. This is so that, of course, they can engage more informally with religious communities in the countries where they serve. During the course of 2021, I wrote to every UK diplomatic post across the world, almost 200, asking about our diplomatic engagements on FORB in the countries where they serve. And I was greatly encouraged by the clear increased understanding of and interest in engagement on FOR by our embassy staff. There's more to do, but there's no doubt that since the publication of Truro in 2019, this engagement by our diplomatic staff has markedly increased. Having said that, of course, there's always more that we can do, and it's very important that the religious training modules don't remain on a shelf, or perhaps more accurately today, I should say, don't remain through a portal which is not accessed by FCDO officials, but is actually accessed and its understanding embedded in FCDO thinking. There is still a way to go before this, before FORB is at the heart of FCDO thinking in the way that other rights are, and that was evidenced by the FCDO Outcome Delivery Plan of 2021-22 published July, when FORB received slight, some may say scant, reference. I'm pleased, however, that on discussing this with our new Foreign Secretary, who took post after that date, that she has a personal support for FORB and has indicated to me that that document does need review. I look forward to working on this. And I thank the Foreign Secretary for a particularly strong statement for FORB this week when she announced the dates of the major ministerial conference to be hosted by the UK on the 5th and 6th of July 2022 in London, when she said, "There are still too many places around the world where practicing one's religion or having no religion can cost you your freedom or even your life. The challenges to these freedoms continue to grow in different shapes and forms around the world, so we must act to help ensure that everyone, everywhere, can follow their own religion or belief." I'm pleased that the Foreign Secretary used the word act. It is one of my priorities to ensure that we move from awareness raising to action, to making a real difference in the lives of people who are losing their jobs, education, homes, livelihoods, families, freedom, access to justice, even life itself, simply on account of what they believe. People who are being discriminated against, marginalised, beaten, threatened, and tortured and killed. On recommendation 9, the John Bunyan Fund was founded as a result of the Truro Review, and we've used this year to fund research to understand the intersecting vulnerabilities experienced by those who are a member of a religious minority and are also living in poverty in the shadows of COVID-19. I commend the excellent research by CREED, the Coalition for Religious Equality and Inclusive Development, funded by the John Bunyan Fund. I launched this at an event last week, and it's helping to raise awareness of how the pandemic has affected the daily lives of religious minorities in India and Nigeria. Can I commend this to parliamentary colleagues, many of whom I know are passionately concerned about FORB, but we're not aware of this work. And this is an excellent example of something I'm constantly experiencing, which is that there is some really good FORB work being done by FCDO officials, but parliamentary colleagues are mostly unaware of it. So I see it as a key part of my role to try to, in fulfilling my mandate, to bring together UK efforts, to initiate better working together. Perhaps if I can put it like this, to enable us, all of us, whether officials or parliamentarians, to cross the road, which is Whitehall, more often. It's only a few yards between the Foreign Office's King Charles Street building and the House of Commons and Lords. And regarding recommendation 17, which required the initiation of a working group to include civil society organisations, I believe this is one of the success stories coming out of the Truro recommendations to date. A round table was formed, the UK FORB Forum, and it's gone from strength to strength. Just a year ago, there were some 45 member representatives on it. There are now nearly 100. NGOs, civil society organisations, charities and academics. I meet with them one morning monthly, and it's proving a powerful opportunity for them to bring grassroots information and concerns from countries where they work, often very bravely and often with very limited resources. Increasingly, I believe that this engagement has the potential to inform government action and policy development, and I see it as a priority to ensure I take back to officials the information shared at such meetings. The UK Fob Forum was initially chaired by the Bishop of Truro for the first year and is now well served by the new elected chair, founder president of Christian Solidarity Worldwide, Mervyn Thomas. It's my pleasure to work with him. I believe we've only just begun to understand the potential of what this roundtable could contribute to championing FORB and challenging its abuses. And again, it indicates the global leadership that UK is demonstrating. It's not too much to say that I believe that this, along with the APPG's work, along with parliamentarians' engagement, are practices that we can and must share, best practices that we can and must share at next year's ministerial conference to inspire others in countries around the world where I've come to learn that there are perhaps only 1 or 2 parliamentarians championing FORB, or where NGOs don't have the opportunity for such collaborative joint working. And this brings me now, yes,
I thank the Honourable Lady, and she's making an excellent speech, and I thank her for her endeavours in her role, which I think are great in making such a difference. In terms of reaching out to other parliamentarians, in terms of freedom of religious belief internationally, is this something that the Interparliamentary Union and perhaps the Commonwealth Parliamentary Union could be working with parliamentarians in the UK Parliament to take forward in the near future?
Honourable Lady for her engagement on this issue, and she makes an excellent point, and indeed the